trainer at the DAF Academy down here in Hadnam, and I'm also a transgender woman. I left school in 1988, so that kind of gives you an idea of how old I am. However, don't ever mention it. And I was a mechanic for 12 years. I grew up around cars. My dad was a mechanic, my brother was a mechanic, and it just sort of seemed like the natural thing for me to do. I just sort of fell into it, really. Back around that time, in the late 80s, early 90s, I remember there was quite a lot of bullying in the motor industry. So, for example, guys having their boots filled with grease and hanging people up on poles from the crane and stuff like that. And I imagine it would have been very difficult for someone from the LGBT community to feel confident or safe in that environment. But the motor trade has really evolved from that time. And I think it's a much more inclusive place now than it ever was back then. And in my particular story, which I'll come to in a moment, I think that's definitely the case, for someone who's quite visibly a part of the LGBT community, which trans people generally are, of course. It can be quite daunting, but the motor industry has been very accepting of me particularly, and other people I know that are within the industry. So it's obviously from that perspective, there's been an awful lot of shift for good. So I was a mechanic for 12 years. As I say, I've been a trainer since 2000. I've been a trainer for 20 and a bit years now, which is quite scary, really. I started to feel how it kind of came that I became aware that I was female, for example. It goes all the way back to probably the sort of late 80s or early 80s. And I would say I was probably around 12 years old, and puberty started, and that all got quite messy. Once I kind of discovered that my body was changing, I didn't like the way it was changing. That was the first indication for me that something wasn't quite right. And that sort of continued on really until sort of later in life, when I got into my 20s and 30s, and I just got more and more sad as time went on. But because of the way I was brought up and where I was brought up and the industry to which I was involved, I felt that the best thing I could do was really just to keep my secret to myself. I was going to take it to the grave. I was never going to tell anyone how I felt about inside, that I felt like I was more female than male, and I was just literally going to carry that secret until the day I died, basically. But then something happened in 2015, and I just couldn't do it anymore. It just became too much, and I plotted my own suicide, basically. Thankfully, I didn't go through with it. I sort of brought myself back from the brink, and I sought help, and the wonderful people in the NHS looked after me and guided me through transition, and I became the person I am now. And that is a strong, confident woman who now works in the motor industry still. And I have found that my employer, Meteor Management, alongside DAF, where I'm embedded here at the Academy, have been really supportive, so supportive, and made life very easy for me to finish my transition and to get through everything I needed from them. And it's just enabled me to do my job to the best of my ability and look after the technicians out there in the network and do my best job training them and making them awesome technicians. The things I did to try and keep my secret, I guess, were, and this is something you'll find a lot with, particularly with guys, is you overcompensate. So inside I felt like a woman. So what did I do? I started bodybuilding. I then started martial arts. I then bought motorbikes and more motorbikes and more motorbikes, because everything I could do to be more male, to try and cure me of how I felt inside. But really, it was never going to fix anything. So ultimately, I was always going to come back to that time in 2015 where a decision had to be made, and I made the right decision, and it's made me who I am, basically. So that is kind of a potted history of what it's like to be trans. I'm actually in the middle of writing a book about my story, so hopefully that'll be sort of finished this year, and that sort of helps people to kind of, or will hopefully help people to understand a little bit more about how people know that they're trans. It's certainly not a whim. It's definitely not a choice. It's not a decision you make lightly. You don't decide to be trans. You're born trans. Same as if someone's gay or lesbian or whatever. You can't decide to be gay. You can't choose to be a lesbian. You're born that way, and it's who you are, and you either embrace it or you deny it, but it ultimately will catch up with you, and you will end up embracing it, because you can't not be who you are. That's just the way life is. You know, whatever your body looks like, for example, it doesn't necessarily mean your mind looks the same way. So I would say when you're dealing with people from the LGBT community, something I will always say to people is just be kind. You know, the hashtag Be Kind is a wonderful thing that's out there at the moment. And it does really relate to a very sort of broad spectrum of things. I find as well with LGBT History Month, it's a perfect opportunity for companies to get on board. Not so much people that are actually genuinely involved in it, but things like Budweiser, for example, are currently using the bisexual flag to sell beer, and I'm loving that because they're just selling beer. You know, being a part of the LGBT community is not about rainbows, glitter, and unicorns. It's about your self-identity and who you are, and it's really nice to see Motus embracing that and actually looking at people's individual stories rather than just putting the rainbow flag on things like a lot of companies are these days. And that's really just exploitation, and it's actually just objectifying the LGBT community, and that's not what we're about. So it's nice to get asked to do something where I can actually be honest about who I am and how being me sort of fits into the whole network of DAF and DAF Academy and the motor industry. But I thought I'd just finish off my little quick bio with a few sort of tips on how to be a good ally. And if you're not part of the LGBT community, then how you can be a better ally to people who are that you may work with. And also bear in mind that you might actually be working with people that you don't know are part of the LGBT community, because I kept my secret for 32 years. No one knew that I was a woman or felt that I was a woman. And in fact, when I did come out, people said, I would never have guessed that you were female, because you were always the guy at the bar with the beers, the biker, the guy with the tattoos and everything else. And, that's part of overcompensation. That's part of coping mechanisms, unfortunately. And that's kind of how we get through things sometimes. And you may not know that someone next to you is gay or for example, bisexual or, struggling with something. And also you may not know that, for example, the guy you're having a joke with, their daughter might be trans, or their son might be trans or gay, and how that's affecting them as a family. So always try and be kind, basically, and just treat everyone as if they are equals to you and they're the same. Trans people, gay people, LGBT people, they don't need anything special from anyone. They don't need special treatment. They just want to be treated the same. I just want to be treated like any other woman, not like a special woman, because I'm not. I'm just the same. And that's really what it boils down to, using the right pronouns as well. So, for example, if someone clearly identifies as a woman, then use a female pronoun. If someone is non-binary, for example, or genderqueer or gender fluid, then if you're not sure what pronoun to use, then ask, because they would rather be asked what their preferred pronoun is than you just use the wrong one and say, well, accept it because that's what I feel that you are. So it's a really easy thing to be a good ally. It's just basically support those people, treat them as equals, use the right pronouns, and just be kind. And that's all there is to it, really. So thank you for listening, and enjoy LGBT History Month, and hopefully have a great weekend. Thanks.